You're looking at a live shot there at the Vatican City, where it's just come up to 2:30 a.m. local, where following Pope Francis' passing, messages of condolences continue to pour in from around the world. Many praising the late pontiff for his dedication to the poor, his advocacy for peace, and fight against climate change. We speak with WWF Philippines Climate and Energy Program Head, Attorney Angela Gia Consuelo Ibay. Meantime, as U.S. President Donald Trump's tariffs cover goods exports only, what impact has it had on our biggest service exports, the BPO industry? Jack Madrid, CEO of IT and Business Process Association of the Philippines, joins us live. And as Trump's tariffs derail, stagflation is on the horizon, warns Security Bank. We check in on market sentiment and risk appetites with Angie Pasis, CEO of AIA Investments. Mourns the death of Pope Francis, the first Latin American pontiff who died of a stroke on Monday at the age of 88. The Holy See says Francis succumbed to stroke, coma, and irreversible cardiovascular collapse. His death certificate was certified by Andrea Arcangeli, director of Vatican's Directorate of Health and Hygiene. Francis stayed inside Rome's Gemelli Hospital from February 14th to March 23 due to double pneumonia, his longest confinement in his 12-year papacy. Cardinal Jorge Mario Bergoglio's ascent to the helm of the Roman Catholic Church was unexpected. He lived a life of modesty that earned him the distinction of being the people's pope. We take a short look back on the life of the man many Filipinos call Lolo Kiko. Here's that report.
Pope Francis' past work with marginal communities allowed him to bring heightened awareness about the plight of disadvantaged people in Latin America and the world. He took the name Francis, drawing connections to the 13th century St. Francis of Assisi, who saw his calling to rebuild the simple spirit of the Church. As Cardinal Jorge Mario Bergoglio, he was among the curas villeros, or priests, who worked in Argentina's shantytowns.
Es un papa que trae a la conducción de la Iglesia y las experiencias latinoamericanas, por ejemplo, de las comunidades eclesiales de base, del trabajo en las villas, de la pobreza, de la idiosincrasia de nuestro pueblo, y eso se traduce en cosas concretas.
He was outspoken about the environment, migration, racial and income inequality, and other touchy subjects.
Él hizo frente a tres temas que para mí son fundamentales. El primer tema tiene que ver con el ordenamiento del Banco Vaticano, y ahí más aún juzgó una persona, de acuerdo que eso no se había llevado a cabo en mucho tiempo. El segundo punto hizo igual frente al tema de los abusos, en donde abusos sexuales cometidos por abusos de poder, abusos sexuales y abusos de conciencia cometidos por miembros de la Iglesia Católica.
Father Julio Lancelotti, who has been serving the homeless population for over 3 decades, reflects on the Pope's doctrine.
Eu acho que para a América Latina e para o mundo é o legado de Jesus, é o legado do amor ao irmão.
His insistence on simplicity earned history's first Latin American Pope the nickname the People's Pope.
Catholics across Latin America are mourning the death of Pope Francis. From Peru to Guatemala, many gathered in prayer, honoring his life and legacy. The faithfuls gathered in churches and cathedrals to remember a pope who changed, quote, unquote, changed the face of Catholic Church. In Lima, Peru, a cardinal called him a breath of fresh air who has been an inexhaustible force for growth. While in Guatemala, a parishioner remembered the pontiff's deep faith in God and commitment to the people, even in his final days. Pope Francis led the church for 12 years. In that time, the Pope became known for advocating for the poor, pushing for church reforms, and calling for environmental action. In 2015, he released Laudato Si, his second encyclical and the first papal document focused on the environment. Laudato Si sparked global movement urging leaders to protect the planet and promote justice. It also shaped the 205 UN Climate Conference in Paris, where nearly 200 countries signed a treaty pledging to keep global warming to below 2 degrees Celsius. In an address to a climate summit in Vatican last year, Francis called climate change a structural sin and stressed its impact on the world's poorest. He also met with youth activist Greta Thunberg, showing solidarity with her call for bold climate action. Former U.S. Vice President Al Gore called him the People's Pope and praised his moral leadership on climate. Francis also invited oil executives and global leaders to the Vatican to push for environmental responsibility. The late Pope Francis called climate change a moral issue that must be addressed. He urged global action, appealing in his 2015 Laudato Si, subtitled On Care for Our Common Home. This encyclical letter is the first ever written by a pope on the subject of environment. It was released just months after the Pope's visit to Tacloban, which was ravaged by Super Typhoon Yolanda, and months before COP21, the UN Climate Change Conference, where the historic Paris Agreement was signed. In honor of the late pontiff, as well as Earth Day today, we speak with WWF Philippines Climate and Energy Program Head, Attorney Angela Consuelo Ibay. So good to see you, Angela. Gia, thank you so much for joining us on this very important day.
Well, thank you for having me.
You know, it's a profound loss for us all, but a celebration as well of the late pontiff, being a climate activist himself and joining everybody to fight against climate change. How big and how important was the Pope's declaration against climate change?
His role was really huge and very impactful. He was really a very much an ally for the environment. He really championed how we would ourselves be part of the solution. His encyclical Laudato Si really called on us to take care and specifically really look at ourselves, our consumption, our ways of living, and even looking at how we use technology, supposedly for the betterment of the planet and not really use it for its degradation. So I think he will be missed in the circle of climate and environment because his voice was very powerful, and it really led to having, at the time when the encyclical came out at Laudato Si in 2015, really led to the Paris Agreement, really galvanizing all of the countries to have that agreement. So even as we move forward, we really hope that his voice, as well, through his writings and through the encyclical, it will still move on and move us all to really to have good climate action.
And also support WWF's vision mission of a future where Filipinos thrive in harmony with nature, building resilient communities, securing the country's natural wealth. So what opportunities are there today for Filipino investors to participate in sustainability-focused investments?
I think the beauty now is that there are a lot of actions that they can undertake and invest in, and it actually has, for the many years, seen how sustainability has been integrated into not just the policy, but into operations within companies and corporations. And I think this is something not just a trend, but really something that many investors should be looking into when they look into their own businesses. WWF has been working with corporates to be able to move them towards what we call scientific-based targets for them to reduce their emissions, and at the same time to find ways that they can be sustainable and relevant, and to also help our planet and the communities where they are located. We know that there are actions such as mitigation actions, which are reducing emissions, such as renewable energy and energy efficiency, and we continue to espouse for them. And we do hope that people will continue to invest in them, not just as for businesses, but even for those who can afford it in their own homes. I think that these are things that we can move and have our own say. Even the simple way of energy efficiency. I think everyone, even the simplest household, can do energy efficient practices. But beyond that, I think there are other things that we should look into how to be resilient. And I think investors should be looking at resiliency actions within their businesses, as well as looking at how they can also help the communities where they're located.
And to your point on resiliency, we often hear about global energy transition, but from your experience at WWF, how can the Philippines pursue a just energy transition, one that protects the livelihoods, the biodiversity, and the vulnerable communities while moving towards renewables?
Yes, well, definitely there's a lot that we can do. Of course, renewable energy is not new, but it's something that has not gained as much traction as what we wanted it to be. But fortunately, in the last few years, has been a big push, especially from our government, to really have like 35%. And we're hoping that beyond, and we're pushing the government to have beyond just the 35% increase in our renewable energy share. What we really want also is that people also understand how they can themselves work towards reducing their effect on the environment. I mean, and environmental degradation and pollution is one of those things that people can do in their own households. So beyond just the government itself and big corporations, and these are actions that we're really hoping that people can imbibe. And today with Earth Day, the theme today is really our power, our planet. And the call for that is not just power in a literal sense, but that we ourselves have the power to make decisions and choices that will be good for our planet.
And power to the youth. I mean, they're the ones that are going to be the most affected. The Philippines, it's got a very young population. How can green industries, from renewable energy to sustainable tourism, unlock the new job markets now for Filipino youths? We have about a minute.
Yeah, I think the beginning of that is really on education. Environmental education, just going beyond that, we do have what we're espousing, education for sustainable development, which we hope our Department of Education would really look into. And I think the youth has a voice. They can be able to be stewards, not just in their own households and in their own schools. They can, in fact, make proposals to how they see their future to be, their vision of a city, their vision of a country which is in tune with our planet. And I think that that's where we can really galvanize and get the youth, not just for their voices, but for their actions that they can help the government and also their communities, and hopefully make this planet a better place for the future.
It's a great message for Earth Day. Happy Earth Day, Gia. Thank you so much for joining us. Attorney Angela Ibay of WWF Philippines. You're watching Money Talks. Coming right up, U.S. President Trump again goads Federal Reserve Chair Jerome Powell to cut rates. And how will U.S. tariffs affect the BPO industry here in the Philippines? We'll find out when we return. Keep it here on One News. Welcome back to Money Talks. I'm Cathy Yang. U.S. President Donald Trump is goading Federal Reserve Chair Jerome Powell once again to cut rates, sending stocks into a decline on Monday's session. In a Truth social media post, Trump renewed calls to ease rates in the face of possible economic slowdown due to his tariff orders. Trump branded Powell, quote, Mr. Too Late and a major loser, an escalation of attacks against the head of an independent agency. In a signal that duties would cause price hikes, Trump met with major retailers, including Walmart, Home Depot, and Target. Big U.S. chains heavily rely on imported goods, and tariffs could raise prices in the near term. One of the countries rushing for a reprieve of levies is India, which is facing a 27% reciprocal tariff. U.S. Vice President J.D. Vance and Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi touted progress in talks for a trade deal between the two countries. Vance arrived on Monday for a 4-day personal visit. Meanwhile, China accuses the U.S. of abusing tariffs after Bloomberg reported Washington is encouraging countries to curb trade with Beijing. The report states that the Trump administration is pressuring nations that seek tariff reductions or exemptions to lessen trade with China. Beijing opposes any party striking a deal at China's expense. Trump's new round of criticism against Powell triggered a sell-off among U.S. markets. The Dow shedding nearly 1,000 points Monday and is set for its worst April performance since 1932. The S&P 500 down by 2.25%, and the Nasdaq falls by 2.5%. 10-year Treasury yields inched up to 4.4%. Gold prices breached the 3,400 mark, setting a new record. Gold is now at $34.06 per troy ounce. Asian markets closed on Monday mixed. South Korea's Kospi up 0.2%. Japan's Nikkei 225 down by 1.3%. And China's CSI 300 rises by 1/3%. Taiwan's TAIEX slides by nearly 1.5%. U.S. futures pointing to slight gains when the markets open later tonight Manila time. The Dow, S&P, and Nasdaq are up by about 0.3%. Asian markets open this Tuesday slightly lower. Australia's ASX 200 returns from the Easter break, down 0.6%. Kospi falling by about 1/3%, and the Nikkei 225 declines 0.5%. Let's take a quick check on the Philippine market, see how they're going. PSCI opens Tuesday higher by 0.1%, 6,146. The stock market closed yesterday, Monday, higher by less than 0.1%. And the Philippine peso opens today slightly weaker, 56.65 to the dollar. Peso closed yesterday stronger at 56.61 against the greenback. Security Bank trims its Philippine GDP growth forecast to 5.9% from 6.1% this year. The bank's economists attribute the adjustment to higher tariff imposed by the U.S. on Philippine exports. They say U.S. President Trump's tariff policies could be a recipe for stagflation, which is a combination of rising inflation, slower economic growth, and high unemployment. Security Bank, however, sees 2 more 25 basis point cuts in Bangko Central's policy rates this year. And with us now for more, Angie Pasis, the CEO of AIA Investment, joining us live. Welcome back, Angie. And post-Liberation Day, mid-90-day pause. So how are risk appetites looking with your diverse clientele?
Okay, it's still depressed as ever. As you know, the wait and see, right? When you have a barking dog in front of you, you're actually frozen. So that's exactly how people feel. Nobody can take big bets because you don't know how this 90-day reprieve will turn out. There could be some successes, or on the other hand, there could be really an escalation of the trade war, and that is actually going to dampen risk appetite.
Right, and I didn't like the word stagflation, but Security Bank had to say it. So that's the risk of high unemployment, slower growth, higher inflation. What's the possibility?
Okay, it will not impact all countries evenly. So the Philippines is unique. Well, not really unique, but it's lucky in the sense that we're actually a domestically driven economy. three-fourths of our economic activity is driven by consumption spending, and we actually have tailwinds there insofar as lower interest rates and also lower inflation. So if you actually take a look at, bifurcate between what the stock market is going to do and what the real economy is going to do, I think we're gonna hold up really well, actually. So we're not looking at stagnation. In fact, the Philippines is actually expected to be one of the fastest growing economy in the world, with uh, growth expected to be between 5.9 to 6%, downgraded from a high of 6.2, but still a decent growth nonetheless.
Which,
Now, insofar as
yeah, which leads us to
so,
where the Banco Central might take interest rates. If that's going to be the case, could it be 3 more cuts this year or less?
okay, so that they really have to move in step with what the U.S. Federal Reserve is going to do. But they've actually pulled the trigger, in the sense that, they called it early and said, there's higher risk to growth, and therefore they cut rates ahead of the Federal Reserve. Now the program is really another 2 cuts this year. So what will actually derail it, if there's really a lot of there's another attack on the peso, a speculative attack on the peso, and if the U.S. Federal Reserve actually holds its rate cutting cycle. But nevertheless, even if the Federal Reserve actually holds up on the cutting, our expectation is, uh, the Philippines actually benefits from lower commodity prices brought about by weak demand expectations. So it actually is a tailwind for the Philippines. So we're not expecting stagflation,
Got that.
but
Okay, that's a
yeah,
good way of putting it then. We'll think of the good tailwinds for now.
yeah.
Angie, thank you so much. Angie Pasis of AIA Investment. Coming up after the break, will the BPO industry buy the U.S. tariffs? Stay tuned to Money Talks on One News. Welcome back to Money Talks. I'm Cathy Yang. The Bank of the Philippine Islands has reported a 9% increase in net income for the first quarter this year. The bank's net profit rose to over 16 billion pesos, up from 15.3 billion in the same period last year. BPI Chief Executive Officer Jose Teodoro Limcauco credits strong net interest income and managed expense growth for the increase. Revenues grew by 13%, driven by higher loan volumes and improved margins. Total loans climbed 13.2%, while deposits went up 6.3%. The bank says it targets faster income growth this year by expanding non-institutional loans and sustainability lending. With us now for more is the President and CEO of IT and Business Process Association of the Philippines, or IBPAP, the country's flagship association, of the IT business process management industry, Jack Madrid. Good to see you back, Jack, and welcome back to Manila. You've been traveling quite a bit this month.
Yeah, always good to be here, Cathy. Good to see you.
All right, so President Trump's penalized goods exports only for now, but it's caused a ripple effect of uncertainty from the financial markets to capex plans. How has it so far impacted confidence and projections on our BPO industry?
Well, we've had no impact so far, but we've seen this movie before. During Trump 1, there was an impact on services, resulting in single-digit growth in both 2017 and 2018. Now, thus far, I think only goods have been mentioned specifically, but it's certainly an issue that we are monitoring very closely because there's a lot at stake. The IT BPM industry comprises almost 9% of the Philippines' GDP, generating $38 billion in export revenue and employing almost 2 million digital Filipino workers. So there's a lot at stake, and that's why IBPAP will stay on top of this very important issue.
That's true, and it really is important because of the impact it has on our GDP. Could you build for us some scenarios? How would outsourcing be affected by Trump's reciprocal tariffs? Would there be a slowdown in the business for BPOs, or would there be more outsourcing to remain cost competitive amid the risk of U.S. recession?
As of today, demand outstrips supply. So the Philippines does not have a demand problem. Every week, IBPAP receives investor interest from both prospective and existing investors who want to establish operations here in the country. And this is because of, what the Philippines has to offer. Being the youngest country in Asia with an average age of 25.3, we need to leverage on that demographic advantage as well as our skilling advantage. Only India and the Philippines can claim to be world leaders in this industry, and I think we just need to capitalize on that. A lot has happened in the past decade. There's a big difference between Trump 1 and Trump 2, but in this case, I think the complexity of the tasks that the digital Filipino workers perform for our global customers is more complex and harder to replicate.
It is, and the fact that there are now the multinational companies that have set up 100% owned corporations, operations, or brands in the Philippines, the JP Morgan Chases, Optums, HSBCs, those are called global capability centers. So how much of a market
we call
share
them GCCs.
have they taken up, and what impact are they having on the industry as a sort of a buffer, if you will, for the industry?
Well, the GCC sector, which is already over 250,000 employees in the Philippines, is one of the bright and fastest growing spots of IT BPM. And I think this is probably going to be, one of the powerhouses moving forward. I track the impressive growth story of the GCCs in India. And I think it's only logical that the Philippines positions itself as the number 2 player in GCCs. Given the fact that there are already over 100 GCCs operating in the Philippines, you've mentioned a few of them. In fact, when the chairman of JP Morgan Chase, Jamie Dimon, was here in the Philippines, he reminded all of us that the Philippines is the 3rd largest country of JPMC in the world on the back of the GCC that they've built, with over 20,000 employees in the country.
Okay, so I'm going to watch GCC while you watch Trump for us. Jack, thank you so much for joining us. Jack Madrid of IBPAP. The Vatican is preparing for the faithful to pay their final respects to the late Pope. His body expected to be transferred to St. Peter's Basilica this Wednesday. That's according to Father Gregory Gaston, rector of Pontificio Colegio Filipino. Here's an excerpt of his interview from The Big Story.
The transfer of the Holy Father's body to St. Peter's Basilica for the homage of all the faithful may take place in the morning of Wednesday, April 23, according to the arrangements that will be established and communicated tomorrow. Yung gist ay yung katawan ni Po will be, yung viewing bali ng katawan ni Po will be starting Wednesday in the morning, this Wednesday.
Open coffin po ba?
More details on the funeral arrangements, including the type of coffin, the final resting place, expected to be announced in the coming hours. Stay tuned as the world prepares to bid farewell to the Pope. That's it for Money Talks, and catch us again tomorrow at 9:30 a.m. here on One News. We leave you now with these live shots from the Vatican City as the world mourns with the city with the passing of Pope Francis.